Hello, everyone. I think we're live. Thank you so much for joining our Desktop Community Standup. My name is Olia Gavrysh. I'm a program manager on .NET team, focusing on .NET Desktop, and I have amazing guests today with me. So this episode will be focused around open source development and contributing to Microsoft repositories. And today I have Igor Velikorossov, engineer on WinForms team, who is working with open source contributions and improving our runtime. Hi, Igor. Thank you for
Hello.
joining us. Yes, and we have two our leading open source contributors, Hugh Bellamy and Tobias. Hi, guys. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having us.
So, just a quick introduction. A few years ago, or some time ago, we open sourced WPF and WinForms code bases. We brought them to .NET Core. Now they will be a part of .NET 5. And we opened this code for contributions for the entire world. And since then, we received many contributions from open source community. And today we wanted to walk you through the process of how these contributions are done, how we process them, how we talk with our open source community, and we will hear from our contributors about their life stories, their open source contribution adventures, and so on. And with that, I would like to start with Igor Velikorossov. Igor, so some people think he has a style cop implanted in his head, and he detects even non-printable spaces. That's what Tim says about him. He lives in the future and walks upside down, or he lives in Australia, and we know his alias is Ruski, and he looks after WinForms runtime. Igor, welcome to the show. Thank you for joining. Do you mind telling me a little bit more about yourself? So what is your role on WinForms team? How did you join the team? What are you focusing on? What does your day-to-day look like?
All right, I'll start with how I joined the team. I'm pretty new to Microsoft. It's been slightly more than a year. It's been a crazy year, but it's very awesome. And I found this role by Twitter. So if you want to work at Microsoft, just follow Olia on Twitter, follow Hanselman on Twitter, and follow other Microsoft people on Twitter.
Yeah, I remember the time when we were interviewing you.
Yes, and I interviewed Y online as well, so it's awesome. And my role is to look after WinForms runtime. It's anything to do when you run your app and to make sure your app is running correctly, it's running the way you expect it to run, and that's what primarily my job is. Obviously, I'm not alone in this, and I get help from my team members and obviously wonderful open source contributors we have. But it's primarily my role, my responsibility to make sure that Windows Forms runtime behaves as it's supposed.
Awesome. Thank you. And since you're focusing on open source contributions, could you tell us more about the process of submitting PR, what happens next, and so on?
Let's step back a little bit. I've been in open source for quite a few years now, so I've been on both sides of open source, as a contributor and as a reviewer. So I do appreciate the joy when your contribution is accepted, and I appreciate the sadness and frustration where your contribution is not even acknowledged, or it's when rejected. So I try to work with this and appreciate every contribution I get. And when before raising a pull request to us or in any repository in general, it's a good thing to talk with the team, to actually acknowledge, hey, I want to work on this issue. Is this issue still available? And discuss how you want to approach the issue, because you may be thinking of the issue in a small, narrow situation, or in our case, where the team may be looking at the significantly more general case. Like in WinForms, we have a lot of consumers around the world, right? And
Oh yeah, so many.
yes, and as a user, you may have found a bug which frustrates you, obviously, but you may be solving for your specific case without regard how other users may be using it, without knowing where the team is planning to take, say, the WinForms runtime. So it's a good idea to talk with the team first and ask questions. Asking questions is always good to find out what's the best way to, I guess, solve the issue or address the issue. And once it's done, once you understand or have, I guess, appreciation how that needs to be solved, then it's a good time to raise pull requests. And a pull request is a discussion, right? It's we don't expect to have a pull request which is finished in first go. Quite often there may be several iterations to the pull request where you send something to us, we'll look at it and say, and provide some suggestions where they can be functional suggestions. So something missing, so something is incorrect or can be improved further. Or it can be non-functional where you don't adhere to our styling, for instance, guidelines, etc. Is that?
Yeah.
Did I answer the question?
That's right. That's perfect answer. Thank you. And so when people are creating PRs, what would be your suggestion? Like, what makes a PR a good PR?
Okay. How much time do we have? I can talk a lot about this.
All of it. We have all of it.
So what makes a good PR? To me, pull request is all about review experience. It's no longer about the author at this stage. It's all about the reviewer. Because as an author, I presume you understand the problem. You understand the solution. Now, by submitting a pull request, now you need to convince me as a reviewer that your solution is correct and is good and acceptable, as well as I need to be able to, I guess, understand your solution, right? And a good PR is the one which is small and targeted, right? Because if your pull request starts addressing multiple issues, it becomes very difficult to reason about it, and we will very much likely ask you to actually break it down or may shut it down because it's not addressing a single thing, it may be addressing multiple things. And another thing, a good PR contains tests, right? So if there is a problem, we want to first of all, I guess, write tests to capture that problem and then provide a fix, and then we can see, well, by fixing this, we have tests, and this problem will no longer come back. Okay,
so make it small, divide into smaller parts if possible, make it nice to review, and don't forget to add tests.
Tests.
Is that correct?
Yes.
Right, perfect. So we have lots of open source contributors, right? If you want to talk a bit about how many PRs we received approximately since we open sourced WinForms, if you have those numbers, let's share.
Right. Oh, that's very exciting. We have 41. We have merged pull requests from 41 external contributor, and we have merged pull requests from 49 Microsoft contributors.
Very impressive.
Do you want to place your bets who submitted more pull requests than we have merged from?
Open source community.
Yes.
Yay.
It's unbelievable, but we have merged 1,147 pull requests from open source contributors.
Wow.
And we merged only 912 pull requests from Microsoft contributors, which is awesome.
Like we have a very effective team out there. All contributors, thank you so much for your input, and we really appreciate your help.
Obviously, I have to make a biggest shout out to Hugh. He's done 756 pull requests to our repo alone.
Wow.
That we merged. Right, I'm not going to count how many.
Yeah. You got 2 open ones left to merge. Actually, three of them today.
And he sent another 3 while we were just preparing this. At this chat. Without him, it looks slightly less exciting. It's 391, but it's still an awesome number. So in less than 2 years, we received almost 400 contributions, excluding Hugh's. Wow. And another interesting fact: I'm not the biggest contributor. I'm at number 3 by pull requests.
Who is number 1 and 2?
Number 1 is Hugh. Number 2, we have a contributor who we know very little about. He's like a Stig in that sense. All we know is his alias is G Petro.
Yes.
So big shout out.
Thank you so much. Big shout out to you. Yes.
Yeah. And I guess one day we would like to find out a bit more about that contributor. Maybe invite him to the stand-up as well.
Feel free to reach out to me on Twitter at Olia Gavrysh. We would love to get in contact with you and thank you personally or over email, invite you to our shows. Thank you so much for your help.
So G Petro, it's 235 and I stand at 201. So yeah,
perfect.
I have some catching up to do. And the 4th one is Tobias. Which is at 45. So, but Tobias doesn't send as many pull requests, but he provides extremely valuable guidance and expertise to us, which is absolutely appreciated. Makes my life significantly easier. I always know if there is a tough issue, I can ping Tobias and say, "Hey, what do you think?" And he goes, "Hey, that's where the problem is."
So you're actually approaching my next question that I had in mind. Could you tell us how do you interact with open source contributors? How the communication process happens?
Because I'm remote and because it's COVID and because it's 2020 now, everyone works remotely. So pretty much all interactions happen at GitHub. That's, I guess, the easiest way to find me. Ping me and engage me via GitHub, either via issues or pull requests. That's pretty much it. You can find me in Twitter as well. I do respond to Twitter. You can find me in Gitter. I do respond in Gitter every now and then, but primarily it's GitHub. Again, with these two fellows, I have them on speed dial, but I don't use that privilege very often. I again prefer GitHub because it's a public domain and everyone can see the conversation. We can learn from this. We can always refer back to conversation we had, which is useful.
Awesome. And once we get PR, how does the process, like, could you describe how we review this PR with the team? I know we invited some of our open source contributors to be the part of our internal Microsoft PR reviews, right, with Imo Landworth and the company. So what happens next? Like, who reviews it when we decide that we move it to the board of reviewers and so on? Could you? Like,
all right. So,
yeah.
Okay. So there's few aspects here. So we accept a range of different issues, and these obviously can be bugs. And so a biggest part of, I guess, my job is to assess and triage bugs. It's when our users find deficiencies and problems. Other things is where our contributors have suggestions, API suggestions, and they go, "Hey, wouldn't it be nice to have this feature in WinForms, such as task dialog, which we mentioned back in May." And for API suggestions, we have a template where we ask an author or a suggestion to think through the issues. We don't accept it just random drive-bys and say, hey, just implement this feature, and someone walks away now. If you want this feature, you work with us. You think through the API, which that feature would involve, how that API would fit into the existing WinForms runtime, and the designer, how it would affect the accessibility issues. And once we discussed that at length, and we have a good appreciation and feeling, and the community chimes in and provides feedback, then we take it to the next level, we take it to email. And the company saying, hey, we have a wonderful proposal which we think is worthy of inclusion. And we ask Emo and other cool fellas and girls at the API review board to play devil's advocate and ask tough questions of us and help us shape an even better API that we can come up with. And once we have a sign-off, we put that feature back into the runtime repo, and it may be that the team would work on it, or more often than not, we put it out for the community contribution. For instance, we had the same experience with Konstantin Pricer. I hope I pronounced the name correctly. Yeah. He proposed a massive feature of the task dialog, and he ran with that feature and implementation. It took more than a year for us to get there, and I'm very thankful that he stuck around with us and saw it through. Hugh provided a number of valuable proposals for list view enhancement, and we got most of them in already, and there's still a few up for grabs. So if you're interested in contributing to WinForms and be part of the story and help to shape the story with us, you're welcome to come and contribute. We have a few other API which have been reviewed and accepted for implementation. They up for grabs. You're welcome to come in and work on them as well.
Yeah, I think there is a special tag, up for grabs.
Yeah, this up for grabs.
Good first issue, right? For those who want to start with something simple and easy, good first issue is a tag. And
with Hacktoberfest just around the corner, you're welcome to come in and ask to be assigned these up for grabs and easy issues and work on them. And one more thing, I suppose I should add. I should have added the video later. Any contribution is valuable to us. Like, I appreciate every contribution, no matter how big or small. Like, if fix a typo in the documentation is fully appreciated. Like, don't be afraid. Don't think that you need to be seasoned, like a veteran developer, right? That you need to be a computer science degree graduate or anything like that. No, you don't have to. Like, if you find something which you think you can tackle, like, fix a typo, it's appreciated. Obviously, there are very difficult issues, like, com interop is not behaving well, and that's where Tobias usually comes in and just
save the day.
just fixes it for us. Obviously, different issues require different skills and expertise, but like, no matter how small or how big and complex a submission is, they all appreciate it.
Perfect, thank you. We have a few questions, so I would like to address them. And the first one was about which repository we're talking about. So we were talking about WinForms repository in particular, but the process is similar, if not the same, for all .NET repositories. So what Igor was just describing applies to EF Core, to .NET Foundation, etc. And other. Oh, that is very nice. Thanks to everyone on the team for contributing to continuing to invest in WinForms. It has really clean and well thought out controls and APIs, plus a great visual design experience that makes it a joy to work with. Well, thank you so much for these kind words. And I want to thank our open source contributors. As Igor just said, we received so much input from the community. So thank you, community, for developing it.
And yes, we are aware of high DPI issues and scaling issues of multiple monitors. So, and we're planning and we're hoping to address them in the next release of .NET, that'd be .NET 6. So yeah.
And there was request for data grid that, yes, we are working on it. It is coming soon. The question, what's new in WinForms for .NET 6? Igor, do you want to talk a little bit?
Yes. So for .NET 6, our main goal is to improve the layout engine and the high DPI awareness. That's our biggest task for .NET 6, because we fully appreciate that high DPI support was lacking in Windows Framework and in WinForms specifically. In .NET Core 3.1 and .NET 5 timeframe, unfortunately, we didn't have enough time and capacity to address these issues. And now when we have sufficiently stable runtime, we're now able to actually start concentrating on these big ticket items where we appreciate customers' want and desire and experience, like painful experience. Painful experience. But you guess the gist. So expect layout and improvement in layout engine and high DPI awareness, and maybe as a stretch goal, we'll get inroads into theming, because I do fully appreciate that everyone wants black or dark mode these days in WinForms. Right.
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of that feature myself. And just to add to Igor's response, we are reviewing Visual Studio feedback tickets. That is a ticket that you can go in Visual Studio in the top right corner and submit a feature request. So we are looking through all those tickets, we are prioritizing them, and some of them will go to .NET 6 as well. So if you have any ideas, suggestions, feedback, please file it through Visual Studio feedback. We will read every single of them, and we appreciate your help and your opinion on it. Right. And I think, Igor, my last question to you was, do you have any interesting story through all the time that you were, all those, what is it, 2 years? A year?
Year and a half?
Year and a half, yeah, that you've been working with open source community. Do you have any fun story to tell us? Or if not, yeah.
Every day is fun.
Every day is a fun story.
It's a difficult gig to be sort of a frontman of the open source repository, right? Be that Microsoft or say I'm sort of a frontman at Git Extensions. That's another open source project I'm helping with. Just shameless plug. Git Extensions is a Windows UI for Git. It's a feature-rich. It's Windows Forms applications. That's why I guess it has a special place in my heart and why I'm participating in it. It's a difficult gig, but it's very enjoyable. I get to interact with a lot of people. I'm sort of blessed with getting people like Hugh and Tobias helping. In WinForms, I have wonderful people helping to build Git extensions. So some days are tougher, because when I have 400 emails sitting in my mailbox because Hugh generated 200 pull requests overnight, and I need to review, and I do feel pressure that I need to acknowledge pull requests and issues in timely manner. As I said, because coming from open source background, I fully appreciate how frustrating it may be when you're sitting when you spend your time quite often after work, after your family went to bed, you're trying to fix something, you're sending pull requests, and for days, weeks, months, and sometimes years, these crickets. I don't like this experience, and I do my best to acknowledge all the submissions, participate in conversations. Unfortunately, there's only 24 hours in a day, and I need to sleep in it sometimes and look after my family as well. So if you think I'm sort of neglecting your issue, apologize. Feel free to ping me and to remind me, because sometimes things fall off my radar. But I do my best to keep engaged and making sure that what you're sending to us is at least acknowledged. At least we have a label and prioritize it. And one more thing, as a team, we have weekly triages. So if you submitted an issue, typically do it on Friday morning Sydney time, which is Thursday in Seattle. So if you send it on Friday or Saturday, it may be a week or sometimes 2 weeks, because we're too busy before we prioritize your issue. So don't feel that you send it to nowhere. We'll look at it and prioritize and put it in appropriate milestone where we feel it we can tackle it, or we mark it as up for grabs and easier, or just up for grabs, and or Tobias only labeled, and then the community can come in and help.
Yeah, thank you so much, Igor. Excellent. I want to thank you for all your work and all your enthusiasm, and for being so proactive and very excited about the product. We're super happy to have you on the team. And thanks for very valuable insights. Now I'm going to spend a few minutes answering the questions, and then we can move to our next guest. So there was a question about porting from libraries from .NET Framework to .NET Core. And yes, we have a porting doc. I placed the link to it in the chat. So check it out. It's on Microsoft Docs, and it has step-by-step instruction how to port your libraries from .NET Framework to .NET Core. Porting from .NET Core to .NET 5 is very easy in Visual Studio. In your properties, you just go to page with target framework, and in the combo box, you choose between Core and .NET 5. So that experience is very easy. Yeah, there is a complaint about large data cannot load grid view, and it is very slow. We are working on it. Yes, thank you so much.
If you think there is an issue, just feel free to open up an issue in the WinForms repo, and we can certainly can look at it.
Right. Yes. As for the designer, would the WinForms designer be suitable and supported for use outside Visual Studio? No, Visual Studio Designer will be a part of Visual Studio. And again, the raising question about WinForms WPF being supported on Linux and other platforms, they will have to remain Windows only, because we have a very strong dependencies on Windows APIs. And for us to work around those dependencies would mean to write those platforms from scratch. But there are multi-platform desktop solution we are working on. It's called MAUI. So go ahead, check it out if you need solutions for Linux and other platforms.
Well, I have to correct you here a little. Windows .NET Framework with Windows Forms can run under Mono. So there is a Mono WinForms implementation, which is part of the Mono.
I was approaching right now, but go ahead. Yes.
Which is part of Mono repositories. We don't look after that. It's open source, I think, in effort. So we don't really maintain that.
So there was a question. I was wondering why the Mono implementation of WinForms was not carried forward. And the reason for that was that was an open source implementation, and they have implementation for some parts and some APIs of .NET Framework 2, right? So very old code of .NET Framework, and they have huge gaps, also problems with performance, with reliability. We take a look at that code as well when we were evaluating and making decisions, and we realized that to provide you a solution for multiple platforms, it would be easier for us to work on the new solution, and that is Maui.
But I had anecdotes then. Some people managed to run .NET Core WinForms under Mono, but I don't have any tangible proof. I heard some anecdotes about it.
Yeah. All right. Did data binding via data source window get pushed back to .NET 6? When I open the data source window, it now says not supported for this project type. Igor, do you want to take this one, or I can speak to that?
I don't know anything about this. It's not part of runtime.
Right. We're working on supporting data scenarios, and we are working on a workaround right now for .NET 5, and the future functionality will come in .NET 6. But we know that you want this functionality. We will definitely enable it. We just need more time and more resources to get it done. All right. And with that, we can move to our next guest, Hugh Bellamy. And he must have invented the source generator and the time stretching machine, because he's able to pump thousands of lines of code into no time. As Igor said, just while we were watching for this community stand-up, he submitted, 3 pull requests? Is that correct? And he is the biggest contributor to WinForms repository and one of the biggest contributors to .NET as a whole. And we know his alias is Hugh. So Hugh, thank you so much for being like such an amazing star performer. And could you tell us briefly about yourself? What do you do for a living? What are your passions and interests?
Sure. First, thanks for having me, and always thanks for reviewing all the pull requests. I know I sent them all in, especially thanks to Igor recently. You've been absolutely fantastic. I live in London, and I've just graduated from the University of Oxford. I read philosophy, politics, economics, PPE. So my background isn't really in coding or computer science per se, but I've sort of taught myself to code from a young age and have made apps and things like that. I have a job at Accenture in tech management consulting that was supposed to start in September 2020, but it's now been moved to February 2021 as a result of COVID. So I'm looking for temporary jobs at the moment, maybe pulling pints, software development, potentially at Microsoft, political risk consultancy, and parliamentary researcher jobs for MPs. In my spare time, I spend quite a lot of time coding. So probably far too much time doing open source, app development, experimenting with stuff, and learning about the latest tech. Spent a lot of time following current affairs and politics, sort of one of my interests, and a lot of time at the pub with friends. So I like to keep busy.
Yes. Well, that is so impressive that programming is not even your main specialty. And thanks again for helping us so much with the contributions. Do you mind telling us, how did you start contributing to WinForms repository? And do you contribute to other repositories? How all that open source contribution adventure started for you?
Sure. So I started contributing to .NET Core Effects and CLR in 2015 or so. So that was about a year before it released into 1.0. I heard about it. I'd used .NET in a lot of stuff, sort of hobby applications, and started contributing, focusing on test cleanups and then additions and then more interop cleanups, performance improvements, bug fixes, features, and API additions. And then I sort of moved on to WPF when it was released at the same time as WinForms, but wasn't really that active there because I didn't really get that many responses from the developers there. I mean, they were very busy releasing a lot of other stuff. So I immediately started contributing to WinForms when it was open sourced. I've used WinForms sort of, it's the first time I used coding actually. So the first app I ever built was a web browser in WinForms. So I kind of had a bit of a connection from my childhood, from my youth. So fancy contributing to the thing that I used to create the apps that I did in my childhood.
Nice. And what other repositories do you contribute to?
Yeah, so quite a lot to .NET Runtime as well. I've done some low-level stuff in Mono's libgdi plus. So that's the port of GDI plus for Linux and Mac and also Windows. I've done a little bit of stuff with the Swift open source framework. That is actually obviously not a Microsoft one, but I did a bit of porting Swift to Windows. I was involved in that effort.
Wow, very nice. Well, thank you so much for your contributions. And another open source contributor that we already had a chance to briefly talk to is Tobias. And about this person, say that he reads binary code and recompile Windows and COM in his head. And he also has a hash table in his head and able to retrieve a link to a GitHub conversation in O1. You think naming an issue label after him? That is Igor's suggestion. And we know his alias is Valkante. Tobias, thank you so much for your contributions. Tell us a little bit about yourself, your hobbies, your passion. What do you do for a living?
Well, I'm from Germany. I've been working as a software developer for over 10 years, and we built software to assist industrial manufacturing and basically cover the whole product life cycle from product planning to production and quality control. And all this time, I've been studying WinForms. From the beginning, I've been working with it and had a lot of time to get to know it.
Yeah.
And I want to share this experience, this knowledge with others, and to make sure WinForms stays a great platform. Besides working as a software developer, I'm learning music, and in my free time, I study a lot of computer science. So I'm very focused on programming and try to learn a lot.
That's amazing. I already have 2 follow-up questions. What kind of music are you learning?
A lot of different styles. I'm learning digital piano, trying to get a feel for it. It's something completely different from programming, and I figured if I have the time to learn it, why not now?
Awesome. And you said you're studying computer science. I think many people would be curious, what do you use for your studying? Do you use any books or resources, or how do you approach?
I'm mostly looking for articles and blog posts on the web, and since I already have a lot of knowledge, I can search for articles which fill in the pieces I'm missing.
Awesome. Awesome. And do you remember your first contribution, your first PR to .NET repository?
Well, when the UI frameworks were announced for open sourcing, I was most interested in WPF because it had a lot of closed source parts. A lot of source code was already available as reference source, so I had already studied a lot. But because WPF got started really slow, I turned to WinForms and started commenting on pull requests and issues, mostly when it was about complicated interop or COM scenarios where I could share my knowledge.
Yeah. So we have a question about where can you learn WPF? Do you have any tips and tricks how you were learning WPF?
Learning WPF is really hard, I think. Back in the days, there were a lot of blog posts when Visual Studio was ported to WPF. There were many interesting things to learn from it. And I also studied what Microsoft did with Visual Studio to port it to WPF. There are a lot of things to learn from it. It took me about 2 years to learn WPF in details, to know everything, how it works in its implementation. It's if you just want to use it, it's something different than to learn how it works internally.
Right. And I just posted a link to Microsoft Docs for getting started with WPF, and there's also many books on it, many courses. If you're fans of educational platforms such as Coursera, Pluralsight, edX, what else? There are many. So that's how I was learning WPF when I was a developer.
My
And
personal style of learning is just pick up another project, either open source or .NET has a great opportunity, so you can look into other programs with a Reflector or EL file, so you can learn a lot of them even if you don't have the source code. So it's a great way to learn just by looking at what other people did.
Yeah, perfect. And we have a question that I would like to ask every one of you guys. So the question was, what do you think is the best option to start a new .NET Core app in Windows platform, WPF on WinForms? I would be curious to hear your opinion, then I will provide mine. So
I'm clearly biased.
Okay, I'm muting Igor. No, go ahead.
There's obviously reason why we have both technologies. All right, WinForms is easy to start with. Like the learning curve is significantly simpler, right? You have that drag and drop experience, like you just whack a few buttons on your phone and F5 and you have your little app. Whereas with WPF, there's significantly a steeper learning curve because you need to learn the intricacies of XAML, the binding, the MVVM, or whatever that model they use behind. So it's significantly more complicated to create a little app. But there are benefits, at least currently, to say use WPF if you want to have custom rendering, if you want to have custom styling and stuff. The WinForms is catching up in that direction. We're obviously not going to go XAML way, but we're hoping to provide some features which allow you to easily, well, we're helping easily to apply styling, and we're improving in the rendering department. So if you watch the previous community stand-up from last month, where my colleague Jeremy presented the optimization we did in .NET 5 in rendering, like we've done some very cool things, and when we have more to come in the following .NET releases. So we're catching up. So that's my take on this.
I agree mostly. WinForms is great for modular composition of existing controls, but not so great for writing your own. It's a lot of work, but the design experience is really great compared to WPF, where you have complete control over everything. And if you want to build an integrated experience, it's much better than WinForms. If you want to replace the complete UI style, in our application, we actually use both WinForms for composing modular forms, and if we need complete control, we use WPF to build a special experience. For example, project planning, a calendar control, or something like that is way too complicated to build in WinForms because you have to write code for everything, and WPF can just use more powerful abstractions.
I have to admit, I've actually never used WPF in my life, so I cannot give you a very good answer to that question.
I think you muted, Olia.
I apologize. In that case, Hugh, I think you can answer the next question. I won't start with WinForms. Is it still a good option?
Yeah, I'd say so. It's faster than ever. It's more easy to use than ever. I think I'm not following as much the work of the designer in terms of .NET Core, but I'm sure that's that's getting that to the point where it's feature equivalent and probably even better. So I'd say so. I would agree.
Yeah, absolutely. I would also agree. And we are, as a team, investing in WinForms. We continue our work on it. So that is definitely the platform that has future. It will be carried to .NET 5, .NET 6, and so on. And we are working on the designer for .NET 5 right now. It will be at functional parity, and it will have even better performance. We have Jeremy, a developer on our WinForms team, and Dustin, these guys made significant improvements into performance and memory allocations. And in the previous episode, you could hear more technical details about that. So yeah, WinForms is a great platform. If you want to start working with it, go ahead. It will be supported and improved.
Go on.
I'll add that the fact that they're the fact you guys are taking all these contributions that have additional risk associated with it, like something like cleanups cause bugs down the line, shows that you're actually invested in the sort of long-term future of the project itself. So that's something you can see as well.
Well, did you know that WinForms, despite the channel community feeling, is still the biggest desktop workload in Visual Studio? Like we more used than WPF or UWP and whatever else. Like, so there is a big future, yeah, in WinForms, because there is a lot of investment. We're not deprecating, and we only want to make it better.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you. There was a question about WinForms EasyB host on Azure, and yeah, Azure scenarios are the scenarios we're thinking about. Please give us more feedback. Please file feature requests and describe what exactly you're missing, how you would like experience to be. That is super valuable to us, and that's how we prioritize our work and build our roadmap. And does the functional parity in the designer for .NET 5 mean that DevExpress controls and designer windows will work in the WinForms designer? We are working with third-party controls such as DevExpress, Telerik, GrapeCity, Infragistic, and we are helping them to enable all their controls for .NET 5 and future. So ideally, you will have all the control vendors supporting new WinForms platforms. All right. Let me just quickly make sure we do not forget any questions. And I had a question for our open source contributors. Could you tell us what motivates you to create PRs, and how is the experience of working as a remote team member? Like, any thoughts on that? Any insights?
Yeah, you may speak freely. You can throw stones at me.
Yes, yeah. That now is the time where you can give us feedback and actually do tell us if something does not work, because we want to improve it. And also, people on the chat, please give us feedback as well. First, feel free to ask any questions to our contributors, but also give us feedback if you are contributing to our repositories and you have any suggestions. Please tell us. We want to improve the experience for you.
I'll go first if Tobias doesn't mind. I think what motivates you to create the PRs is I quite enjoy learning about the technologies that I use in my sort of hobbies and maybe even day-to-day work, and seeing how they're implemented on the hood. And I quite enjoy cleaning things up and adding tests and things like that to make sure that everything works. And I think I probably agree with most people in that it's quite good and interesting and fun and rewarding that PRs that I make will sort of directly, indirectly affect, and hopefully positively, the experience of maybe even tens of thousands of developers on the Windows platform using WinForms. On the Windows platform using WinForms. And in terms of my experience as a remote worker or member, I think I've sort of felt as if I'm a Microsoft employee most of the time. I mean, I'm looped into the conversations, and the PRs are reviewed quite thoroughly and honestly with lots of different members contributing. So it's really fun to be looped in. So I've had a very positive experience.
Great. Perfect. And we have one more question. So I will be alternating between our open source talk and answering the questions in the chat. So right now we have in Visual Studio, the templates default to .NET Core 3.1 when you create a new WinForms project. Is this by design? Any plans to set default to .NET 5? Yes, this is by design, and it will be set to .NET 5 once the full version of .NET 5 will be released, which will happen in November. Right now, .NET 5 is still in the preview, and we don't set the default experience to preview version. But once we move to .NET 5, that would be the default. Thank you for the question. And yeah, Tobias, Hugh, if you have any feedback or any suggestions how we can improve our process, or if you want to complain, now is a good time. Please share your thoughts or any ideas how we can make your life better and contribute into our repositories easier.
Generally, the WinForms repository experience is really great, I have to say. One thing I'm a bit wondering about, concerned about, is the designer integration is not part of the runtime, so it's a bit hard to give input for the designer. So far I've completely ignored the designer in my my work, because for a long time it wasn't usable at all, and with .NET 5 it finally will give it a first try. But I'm really interested to know how feedback for the designer will work. Will it everything have to go to Visual Studio feedback channels?
Yeah, that that is the most optimal way for us, because with that we also get some telemetry regarding which version of the designer you're using, etc. But you also can reach us out on the GitHub repository, via Twitter, whichever channels you prefer. A Visual Studio feedback channel is the easiest way for the team to process your feedback. So that is our preferred way. Igor, did you want to say something?
Well, I was pretty much wanted to say the same. And just to mention that we take VS feedback seriously as well as GitHub. I know a few members of the community had an impression that submitting VS feedback goes nowhere. For our specific team, it's not the case. We do take VS feedback seriously. It gets routed to the team. They review it and they prioritize it. That may not be the case for some other repositories or for Windows in general as a feedback but for the designer, we prioritize, triage all the issues. Well, the team is. I'm not part of that experience. But we do take seriously all the feedback, because we fully appreciate that this designer, Windows Forms designer, is, say, 80% of the Windows Forms experience. Right? Without a designer, it's extremely hard to build WinForms applications.
Yeah, absolutely. And we, as a WinForms team, are doing our best to enable the full experience for the designer as soon as we can. That was a lot of work for us, because we had to make it, to build it on the completely different approach and architecture, but we're getting there. It's already much better than it was before, and we're finalizing the adding missing pieces, etc. All right, so I guess my last question to our contributors would be, what would you advise and new contributors who are thinking about start with adding their PRs, but maybe are not confident or hesitant? Like, what would be your advice to those people?
I'd probably start by looking at some project priorities. I guess sort of what's the work that's going on in the project. What are people prioritizing? So a way to do that is look at the open PRs and issues to figure out what are the people working on, I guess, and how can I help out on that. So I mean, obviously the classics as well. You've got the labels up for grabs, easy, needs code coverage. There's one for like needs testing as well. So that's a very good way to sort of get yourself to understand what's going on in the project, and then therefore you can understand how to contribute to things. I think also remember, contributing isn't just, as we said earlier, isn't just PRs. Although, you know, I tend to contribute most of my PRs. I mean, Tobias has submitted many great issues, and not just issues, but analysis on issues. So if you can offer some context, if you can offer some help, maybe even coming up with a reproduction of a bug as well, is really quite a nice way to start. Once you submit a PR, probably try to make it self-contained. I mean, we talked about this earlier, small and targeted. I mean, this is something I erred on when I started contributing. I submitted sort of big PRs that had thousands of lines of changes. And if I split them up a bit more, then maybe it'd even be easier for Igor to review them. So try to split things into different commits. If you can't do that within the sort of, if everything is in the same PR, definitely split it up into commits. And then finally, as we said earlier as well, add tests. It can be a bit hard to do that. I mean, in complex sort of UI scenarios or ActiveX and Olia interop or Olia interop and Office interop. But I mean, there's been some good movements there. So I know Jeremy has created this sort of EMF validator that can validate user interfaces. So that's also quite a good sort of, we're developing the testing framework to help you out there.
Perfect. Thank you, Hugh. Tobias, do you have any advice?
Yes. My recommendation is, if anyone has an idea, it's really easy to get started. You can just clone the project, compile it yourself, and dive right in and try out your idea.
Yeah, makes sense. Perfect. Right.
I will say, sorry, I'll add as a slight pet peeve, it can be a bit difficult with arcades to get started, but that's getting better, and I know that everyone's working on that.
Yes, yeah, you're absolutely right. And that's a good feedback, and we're working on that.
Yeah, and if you get stuck, just shout out. We have GitHub issues, plus we have GitHub discussions. So if you want to ask questions, feel free to wander in the discussions and ask questions, and we generally try to help, because, as I said, like, I love community contributions. I like community involvements.
Yes. Right.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate Hugh, Tobias, and obviously everyone else, like all these, how many, 41 contributors who we merge PRs from, and all these contributors who come and raise bugs too, because, like, we may not know all about the bugs, and we don't know how users use and abuse the Windows forms. So yeah, just because you come in and raise a bug, it's important to us, because it may help us make it better for you. I really appreciate it. Like, the whole team fully appreciates the community involvement.
Perfect. And we have a command. Contribution was a great experience for me. No improvement onto mine. Thank you so much. We're very happy to hear that. And we want to thank you for your contribution. We really appreciate your help. And there was a question about design patterns for WinForms. So in WPF, the MVVM is the most used pattern. Which pattern do you recommend for WinForms apps? Again, I will, do you guys want to answer what you think, and then I can share my thoughts? And if not, I can say that, yeah, for WPF, MVVM is the pattern, right? It is very closely tied to this pattern. For WinForms, we don't have the pattern, so you can use whichever works for your application. We did not develop WinForms with one pattern in mind that you absolutely should be using. So whatever works for your app, go with that.
Yeah, I think WinForms was born way before any of these patterns were developed.
Yeah. All right. If there are no more questions, if there are no more questions, then I want to thank everybody for joining us today. You can always find us on Twitter. My handle is Olia Gavrysh. Igor is Ruski. You can post your Twitter handle in the chat, Igor. And I want to thank our contributors as well. Thank you for joining us at your late night. And Igor joined us in the middle of the night. I believe it's 3 a.m. for you right now, right?
Yes, it's 4 a.m. right now.
Yeah, that's crazy.
And I have 9 o'clock meetings, so it's a sort of dilemma whether I should go to bed or stick around.
Thank you very much, everybody, and see you next month. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.